Hello and welcome to installing VMware vFabricWebServer. In this screencast, we'll be installing the web server on top of CentOS 6.3. First, we do a search with yum to see if the vFabric repos have been installed. We don't get anything back from our search, so we need to run two RPM commands to install the software repos from which we will install the vFabric software. The first one of these is a release-specific repo, in this case the 5.1 release of the vFabric tools. And then the second RPM command we'll run here in a second will add a repo that contains vFabric software that's not specific to a particular release, such as an end-user license agreement. So now that we've installed those two repos, when we do a search with yum for any package containing the string vFabric, we get a much larger list, and it includes the software that is the subject of this screencast, the web server. Now notice there are actually three different packages we can install using yum. The web server itself, the web server debug information if we needed to do some serious debugging, and then the headers and libraries if we were actually doing some module development for the web server. But we're not going to use those, we're just going to install the vFabric web server itself. So we run yum install vFabric web server. It prompts us if we want to download the two RPMs that make up this package. We say yes. Then it prompts us to import a GPG key, so we know that we're getting our software from a trusted source. And then the end-user license agreement that we can page through or just type Q to jump immediately to the end. When it prompts us, do we want to accept the end-user license agreement? We type the words yes, hit return, and the install completes. Okay, let's see exactly what the install did. First, we'll cd to /opt VMware, which is where the vFabric web server files get installed. We look in that directory, and we see a number of things, one of which is fixrootpath.pl, which is a script traditional with Apache to fix the paths in the web content. And we'll see that this has actually been run as part of the install script. If we do an RPM -Q with the scripts option, it shows us the scripts that ran during the execution of the vFabric web server installed. And one of the things that got performed was that fixrootpath.pl Perl script. Now, the other thing we have to do after installing vFabric web server is, much like TC server, we need to create an instance. And we do this with the new server.pl command. So here we're going to create an instance named Spring Trader. And the first thing it asks us is whether we're going to run SSL. And if so, then it takes us through a number of prompts involved in creating a self-signed certificate that will be used to serve that SSL connection. Here we're entering the certificate information like our location, our organization name, and so forth. And we're not entering a real email address because this is just a self-signed certificate. And then we're done. So the instance is created. The directory it is created in is the root install directory, and then the name of the instance, which in this case is Spring Trader. If we look at that directory, we notice there are a number of directories that mimic a traditional Apache install. There are a couple subdirectories. Note that everything's owned by root except for the var subdirectory, and then logs has the vFHTTPD group, so that members of the vFHTTP group can create and files in that logs directory. Notice that conf is still owned by root because it's intended that only root users be able to change the configuration. You may wonder where the vFHTTPD user got defined, and with TC server, this is the user gets defined in the install process. Here it actually was the creation of the instance that added the user, And here we can see that user in etc. password. Note that the shell is bin no login, so that users can't specifically log in as that user, but you can run processes or SU to that user. And if we look at the etc. group file, we'll see the vFHTTBD group defined at the end of that file. This was done by the make instance script. Now, if we look in the bin directory, there's the command httpdctl, which is the command you use to start and stop the web server. So we run start, and lo and behold, in this case, it failed. So perhaps we'll have a look at the logs, and error_log seems like the appropriate one to look at. And if we look at that, we get this message, name or service not known, unable to find IPv4 address of CentOS 63-1. Configuration failed. Well, maybe we should look in our configuration and see where that value is used. So we'll look in the conf directory in the file httpd.conf, and we'll search for that. And the entry of interest is server name, the second place where it appears. And basically it gives the server name and the port. And notice this comment, if your host doesn't have a registered DNS name, enter its IP address here. So perhaps the problem is that we are unable to look up that host name. So let's give it a try. And when we look it up, we get a strange address. It's probably not the one on our system, but let's run ifconfig to see what our real IP address is. And it's 192.168.1.70. So let's just add an entry for that to the hosts file and see if that solves our problem. So we edit etc. hosts. We create an entry that maps our IP address to the host name that appeared in http.conf. And we'll put two variants. We'll do CentOS 63-1 just by itself, and then we'll also add the site.site suffix. So now let's see what happens when we try to start up the vFabricWebServer. Same command, starting Apache, and the server started okay. Success. So now let's go try and browse that site from a browser on a different system. So we're going to enter the IP address directly, 192.168.170. We don't have to enter the port 80 because that's the default. And we're still having problems. We had an error there. Was not able to find the server. Let's see what happens when we try to get that URL on our local system, the same system where the vFabricWebServer is running. And that works. We use wget to get the same URL, and it was able to retrieve the index.html file. So this is something of a mystery as to what's going wrong here. Let's see if we can troubleshoot what's happening. So we're on the system that has the vFabricWebServer installed, and HTTPD process is running. Let's see if we can find what process is listening on port 80, which is what we're trying to connect to. And yes, when we do LSOF to see what's listening on internet port 80, we see that it is in fact our web server processes. You know, there's a IP tables that implements, it's a service on Linux that implements a firewall, and yes, it is indeed running. And if we do a check config to see what the default state is, yeah, when we start up and enter either state 3, 4, or 5, 5 is most likely to default, then Linux starts up the IP tables service, which is probably blocking access to the port from remote systems. So let's stop that service, and then we'll make sure that it actually did stop with the status command, and it's not running. So let's go back to a browser on a different system and see if we can connect now. So we already have the URL loaded up. We hit refresh, and voila, we have success. We have successfully connected to the vFabricWebServer by disabling the IP tables firewall. So let's go back and make that change permanent, in that we'll run check config so that now for all the runtime states, the IP tables service is disabled. On a real system, you might want to do some more specialized poking of holes through the firewall rather than just disabling it entirely. But in our case, that's the quickest and dirtiest way to get going and end this screencast on a successful note.